The goal should always be is to take automation as far as possible with the current limits of technology. And I think there's no reason for us not to go all the way.
As you make it easier for people to just get in and start building, you're going to see an explosion of builders across the world. And I believe you've mentioned this many times, like that is very much part of your mission.
You can create a vibe coding platform in an afternoon. I think people will lose their jobs. I think not saying that is being dishonest. I think any CEO working in the space will be able to intuit that. And if you're trying to build something, just don't worry about learning the code first. Go build it first. If you have to learn the code, you'll learn it along the way.
All right, Amjad, thank you for joining me today.
It's my pleasure.
All right, I'm excited to talk to you about vibe coding and everything Replit. I have been a fan for a while. I've been vibe coding a ton, so I'm really excited to get your take on everything vibe coding. Let's get right into it. I want to kind of set the scene first. Does Replit serve vibe coders or traditional software engineers or both?
Mostly vibe coding. So we have quite a bit of software engineers on the platform, but when our mission since the start of the company was to make programming more accessible. The sort of insights I had back even when I was a teenager is that there is a difference between having ideas and really good ideas to be able to build businesses or write software programs or write games or what have you, versus the minutia and the drudgery of all sorts of things IT related to programming are two separate things. And it's a tragedy that we have to spend so much time, whether it's software engineers or others, dealing with that stuff. You know, it's traditionally called essential complexity versus accidental complexity, and that was coined by I think John Brooks in the book The Mythical Man Month. And basically, like, there's so much nonsense we have to deal with. So when we started Replit, even back in 2016, we were solving the development environment nonsense, but then we start solving the deployment nonsense, and ultimately the biggest source of pain of it all is coding and syntax and all of that. And so I don't think of it in terms of like who's supposed to be using it, more as like who has ideas that they want to build really quickly without worrying about all that stuff.
Yeah. Okay, that's a good definition, and we're going to talk about this transition from kind of traditional coding to vibe coding, what the future of software might look like. We're going to get to that in a moment, but you, Replit, just launched a suite of new features. I want to talk about those a little bit. It seems like they're aimed at making vibe coding more powerful, kind of sanding off the rough edges and where the limitations are. Maybe you can just speak briefly to what you guys launched and how it helps a let's say, traditionally non-software engineer build more code and take their ideas to production.
Yeah. So the idea of vibe coding came from Andre Karpathy and his experience with it.
Tweet.
The famous tweet was that I'm sitting in front of Cursor and I'm not reviewing code at all. I just tell it to like do certain things and I accept the code. I'm just vibing, right? And that became the term to describe not just like engineers doing AI coding, but also everyone else who's kind of willing to trust the AI to generate the code on their behalf. And that's a useful term. I think it created a lot of excitement and buzz. Naming something turns out to be very, very important. But I think it undersells the vision. Kind of the vision, again, is you have a problem you want to solve. You have an idea for a product you want to build, and you should be able to express those ideas and have it be done for you, or have it be built as far as it can be. And the solution to that Replit has innovated is agents, and to be specific, autonomous software development agents. So in September 2024, Replit Agent was the first kind of true agent on the market. The modality at the time was that I am sort of coding and Copilot is auto-completing my code, or I'm in Cursor doing Composer and sort of editing pieces of code. But the idea of like an agent provisioning a development environment, installing packages, provisioning databases, deploying for you. That wasn't a thing back then. So we sort of created that. And it sort of supported this vibe coding modality. But the thing we want to get to is actually working with Replit Agent as if it was a teammate, as if it was some an engineer you've hired. And so Agent 3 really embodies that. And the idea behind Agent 3 is that you should be able to offload entire tasks and have the agent be able to work for hours if you give it like a really big task. You should be able to test its code by really opening a browser and going around and clicking and testing and making sure everything works. It should be able to look at the logs. It should be able to create test case scenarios. It should be able to review its code. It should be able to refactor. And so that really goes from the idea of like coding with an assistant to really delegating work to an agent.
Yeah, and it's interesting because if you're familiar with software engineering, if you've built code in the past and then you started to get exposed to vibe coding, the things that you mentioned are what you figured out you need to do with an agentic coding assistant, right? So being really vigilant about Git, being very vigilant about writing tests and testing thoroughly, having to-do lists and all of these things. It seems like Replit is becoming more proactive at helping the kind of traditionally non-software engineer write great code.
Yeah, and it's just the question about technology. What is the separation between what's the responsibility of the user, the human, the driver in the example of a car versus how far we want to take automation? In reality, the goal should always be is to take automation as far as possible with the current limits of technology. So we've seen that with driving cars, self-driving cars. Initially, it was the assisted driving, right? Like it should just like maintain the speed, and then it was lane assist. It should be able to go left or right. And then it was able to go off ramps and on ramps. It wouldn't drive in the city, but autopilot was pretty good at that. And now we have self-driving, where it still needs supervision, but it can go from point A to point B all the way in itself. And I think we caught up to that on the agent side, on the software development agent side. And I think there's no reason for us not to go all the way. So actually, the first time we felt like agents are possible, there's this very popular venture capitalist. His name is Yohi. You might have seen him on Twitter. He's like vibe coder par excellence. He built one of the earliest.
We have him on the show on Friday, actually.
Oh, great. I don't think he gets enough credit for one of the earlier developers of agents. So he built Baby AGI. That was a really great demo.
That's right. I remember that.
What's possible. And so he's a Replit user, been for a long time. And remember inviting him over to the office, and we're like, okay, can you build something in front of us? I just want to see how you code, because I know you don't know how to code, but you're able to build these amazing things. So what he was doing is he opened Claude on the side and he opened Replit on another side. And so he would type a prompt, he would get a piece of code, he would paste it in a Replit, he would run it, he would get an error, he would copy that error, go back to Claude, paste that error, get an updated code. And I was like, we could just automate that, And so every step of the way, you find the kind of gaps that people are filling in. For example, you mentioned Git or a to-do list or any of those things, or architecture diagrams or architecture, markdown files, and we're just, making the agent. We're programming all of that into the agent.
Okay, and it's interesting because I've been thinking about creative endeavors as the entry point into artificial intelligence lately. Like, I think Google just said they onboarded something like 11 million new users because of Nano Banana, and VO3 kind of did the same thing. I remember when ChatGPT 4.0 image came out, it was very similar. And it's like, if you can make software creation as easy as it is to now create images or create videos, there is that creative outlet that people want to really build incredible things. But again, they don't really want to get into the minutia, as you said, of the code. And so I think as you make it easier for people to just get in and start building, you're going to see and continue to see an explosion of builders across the world. And I believe you've mentioned this many times, like that is very much part of your mission.
Yeah, it's interesting. AI grows in these series of hype bubbles. It's sort
Yeah.
of like not different from crypto. I've been Bitcoin for a long time, and you saw that 2013 bubble, which was like $100 to $1,000, and then you had the 2017 bubble, which was like $1,000 to $10,000, and so on and so forth. And remember, like my dad back in Jordan learning about Bitcoin from the 2017 bubble, right? And he's probably a little bit not an early adopter, but definitely not like a super late adopter. He's kind of sort of plugged in and want to see what's happening in the world. But that now we're in a crypto bubble that it is like reaching your grandma, and people is really not interested in technology. And same thing is happening in AI. In the 22, call it 21 GPT-3 bubble. I don't know if you were part of that community back then, but it felt like it was exploding and everyone knew about it, and everyone
Yeah.
was in the OpenAI playground with the green text and like doing all these experiments. And in retrospect, that was so small relative to the ChatGPT bubble, right? And so
Yeah.
the 2023 ChatGPT bubble, and so on and so forth. And yeah, Nano Banana is another one. I think the vibe coding bubble is actually, I think, waning down a little bit. And there's it grew really fast, and a lot of the companies grew fast, and now we need to go to the next evolution. And I think you need to, and I think that the principle is reducing the barrier to entry and getting as
Yeah.
close as possible to a true prompt to app experience. And this is that this is the vision behind Agent 3, and we think we're gonna be able to onboard an entirely new set of folks that wouldn't otherwise be bothered to look at this stuff because it's still too difficult.
Yeah. And look, like I love vibe coding. It's a lot of fun, but it still has very severe limitations to it. And hopefully some of the new features you're launching lift some of those limitations. But and I come from a software engineering background, but if you think about it, for somebody who's never been exposed to this stuff before, I was following along when Jason Lemkin had his issues on Twitter and was complaining. And like, what is the hardest currently reliability problem for vibe coding? Where are those edges currently, including your new release?
Hey, by the way, it's impressive that Jason kept with it, and now he's built
He
like
did.
6 apps, and he's like a
It's
huge Replit
addictive and
champion.
it's
Yeah,
fun. Yeah.
yeah. So I do think it's all learnable, but it is. I think the part of the problem is like a little expensive as well. So I think if people keep with it, they'll be able to get through it and eventually create tremendous value for themselves and their businesses. But the question is about difficulty or
Yeah, like where are the current edges of vibe coding? I found maybe like a month ago it was a few thousand lines of code or some
Mhm.
kind of complexity threshold. What is it
Yeah.
today?
Yeah, to get a little technical, because I know a lot of people watching your audience are technical.
Mhm.
Um, the right now, the way models have been improving is, we go from the era of pre-training scaling, put as much data and compute into the base model, to the era of like post-training, and more importantly, sort of runtime scaling, inference compute, test time scaling. There's so many names for the idea of like spend as much tokens as possible in order to try to solve the problem. Now, one thing is crucial there, once you have verification, then that becomes really possible. I think NVIDIA showed that maybe like last year, where they had an NVIDIA kernel optimizer using DeepSeek, or earlier this year using DeepSeek R1. And the insight they came up with is if you put a verifier in the loop, they're able to kind of verify whether the kernel works or not. Then you can just run the AI for as long as possible until it solves the problem. And in their case, they were like, "Oh, we're able to run DeepSeek for 15 to 20 minutes. I was able to do all this amazing stuff." And in our experience, yes, if you have a good verifier in the middle and you have good architecture around the system and you've done good prompt engineering and you've done some like important things such as context management, context compression, all of that, you can run LLMs right now for as long as needed to solve any particular problem. Like theoretically speaking, there's probably no insurmountable software engineering problem right now, given that you have the right environment to test this in place. So the main thing we went, I mean, that's like a big statement. There's like a lot of nuances to it, but it's truly my belief that we're at a point, if you can afford the tokens, you can let it run as much as possible and break through a lot of walls for you.
Yeah.
So based on this insight, we spent a lot of our time on testing. So the first thing we tried was computer use models. The cool thing about Replit being so focused on building applications as opposed to running your enterprise repo, we're like, okay, we have a constrained problem. The AI needs to open up a browser window and go around and test the elements and make sure things are work, submit a form, use the app. So naturally, we went for computer use models. And we were very disappointed. I was so bullish in computer use models when they first came out. It was kind of the first sort of like as big of a magical experience as GPT-3 was, like seeing a model use a computer like a human would. But they're so expensive. They're so error prone. They're kind of bad in general. And they haven't been improved. And that's worth kind of thinking why there's not a lot of progress there. So we kind of put down this problem, focus on other things, but it kept coming back to this idea of like, if we want to be able to run the agent in a more autonomous way, in a self-driving way, there needs to be verification. There needs to be feedback from the environment. So we went in and we built our own computer use framework because it's a constrained problem. We're able to innovate, and I think we're sharing some data. The sort of computer use framework that we built is about 3 times faster than traditional computer use, and it's about 15 times cheaper to run. So we're able to kind of really put it in the loop and have the agent decide to test its code every time it makes a major change. So that was one of the first steps. The second step was a major architecture change in creating those to-do lists. Claude Code kind of innovated this idea, and the idea of sub-agents as well. So when you combine all these things, we are able to run, like our marketing is saying we can run up to 200 minutes, but we actually run Replit Agent for 4.5 hours. And It was actually able to build an application end to end that would take an engineer, pre-vibe coding about like a week to build. And that was like an amazing experience. And when you look at the log, you can see it's struggled in a way that 2 months ago, the vibe coding tools of 2 months ago, if a non-technical user is sitting in front of it, they would just rage quit. It would struggle with WebSocket connections, for example. WebSockets is notoriously hard for LLMs because it's Zudo distributed systems problems. It's hard to create a test environment for it. But with Replit's kind of browser use, it creates multiple browsers. It kind of tests different users and make sure the real-time thing is working. And it was able to you really punch through a lot of doors and a lot of technical problems and get to a solved solution. So I think that's the main insights and the main innovation why we think Replit when people start to use Agent 3, they'll find out that it's the most autonomous agent on the market.
I'm a big believer that these models are already incredibly good, and really, as you're describing, scaffolding is kind of all you need
right.
to use the famous paper meme. But if you were a model provider, if you were creating a model yourself, if OpenAI, Anthropic, Google, what would you focus on to optimize? Because running for 4 hours sounds great, but maybe you can compress that down to an hour. So maybe it's speed. You also mentioned cost as a huge limiting factor. So what would you optimize for if you were creating a model yourself? Speed, quality, agentic ability, something else?
Yeah, look, the best thing to do, it might not be feasible, but the best thing to do is to be able to one-shot every problem. Like that 4 hours could be 10 minutes if they're able to one-shot the code exactly to what you want, right?
So that's like a function of quality then.
Yeah.
Intelligence level,
code quality. But I assume we are sort of at a plateau insofar how much they can one-shot. I think 3.5 Sonnet 3.5 was a major leap forward, where you go from 4.0 being able to write a file tops to 3.5 max being able to like spit out megabytes of code and like scaffold an entire project. With 3.7 and 4, we started seeing diminishing returns. It's not really able to kind of really one shot that impressive of an application, maybe a front end and a little bit of back end. So let's assume that's somehow harder of a problem. Then the thing that I would fall back on is agentic benchmarks such as a Sweetbench. So Sweetbench, I think we're at like 70% now. I would definitely try to get to 100, just like climb that beast,
Yeah.
and it's a lot about it. A lot of it is about tool calling. A lot of it is about uh, responding to feedback from the environment, which again is what we focused on. Can you kind of run a set of commands, run tests, get feedback from that, and then generate hypotheses for why it's not working? So this art of debugging. And I think that's one area where it seems very possible to make more progress. And I think the bottleneck, I'm speculating at this point. It feels like the bottleneck there is good RL environments that allow the agent to generate a lot of code, test that code, get feedback from that code, and sort of iterate on that and train throughout this process.
All right, let's talk about competition a little bit. There are a lot of vibe coding platforms out there, and when all of them have access to the same top of the line models from Anthropic, from OpenAI, from Google, how does Replit differentiate itself? Is it UI UX? Is it scaffolding around it? What do you say there?
I think that depth of the platform is very important. So you can create a vibe coding platform in an afternoon. Literally what you need is you need to call Claude, generate some React code, open an iframe, put that React code in an iframe, and it will like render it. So, so if you want to start off
It sounds
idea,
so easy.
it is kind of like to do like a basic vibe coding platform, which a lot of them are kind of, you can just do that. Um, and then obviously UI UX matters, but I tend to think that UI UX is a sort of a public good. The moment you innovate on UI UX, it's like immediately copyable, and like
Yeah.
people have copied Replit left and right, and I love it. Like when we release something immediately, like the competition, for example, like we just released like plan mode, and I saw someone from like Cursor's team was like, "Oh, what do you think if we release plan mode?" Which I don't really think of them as direct competition, but like UI UX is not something that you can truly have a moat around. However, I think technical depth of the platform is perhaps not a forever moat, but it is something that might take years for people to catch on, and you can have an innovation or a set of innovations there, or just simply really hard problems that you've dealt with for a long time that takes a while to catch up to. I'll give you one example. Um, Replit, we've always wanted to build a platform that's inherently collaborative, that is really fast to start up virtual machines in the cloud, that is very easy to fork and remix and do like Git operations on. And so for all these reasons, we had to build a file system. We had to build a distributed file system that has one important property, which is copy and write. So the idea behind copy and write is when you have a data structure, and you want to make a clone of that data structure. Typically, you have to copy every data item to this new array or new file system or what have you. In copy and write, you say copy, it says, okay, copied. It lies to you, but it says copied. And then the moment you want to write an element, it will actually copy that element and change it. And then all the other elements are still maintaining references to the original sort of file system or data structure. And so what that unlocks is immediate, like, Git forks. And also, we can have like a base template. And every time we want to start a virtual machine to run, React.js or Next.js or whatever, we can just like immediately start the virtual machine linking to like one base file system that all the machines are linking to. So it just made the platform a lot more collaborative and fast and all of that. Now, what we're seeing in terms of the downstream effects on the kind of things we're building with agents is really profound. For example, every time we start a test environment, that test environment is a fork of the entire environment, because you don't want to test in the same environment as you're running the user's code, because you end up corrupting the environment. You end up doing a lot of bad things to it. And so the ability to just like immediately fork an environment, do the test, throw away that environment, bring back the results to the main branch of the code, to the main branch of the context, is I think it's crucial to build an experience like that. You can also, things that are working, we're working on down the line, is parallel agents and parallel execution. For example, you have a really hard problem, you can generate 5, 10, 20 trajectories. And by the way, this is how you get your sweet bench number up, as the idea of being able to sample. So we can fork 100 environments in 200 milliseconds and be able to sample multiple agent trajectories and then pick the correct one. So there's so much depth to Replit's compute and virtual machine infrastructure that we built over 10 years. And I think that's a differentiator that will continue to show up. I think Agent 3 is the first time that people will say, holy shit, like, okay, this will take us a really long time to replicate in our sort of iframe based environment. And I think Agent 4 and so on will be pretty obvious.
Yeah, it's interesting because people see your ARR growth over the last year or so, and think, oh wow, Replit's an overnight success, but it's really a 10-year overnight success, and it's very clear in the depth of the platform as you're describing. But I want to just touch on one more thing on the competition front. I think about platform risk quite a bit, and Replit is built on top of the core, maybe not built on top is the best way to describe it, but it's essentially using the core models of, let's say, Anthropic, OpenAI, and they're building their own coding agents, coding products, Google CLI, Gemini CLI, Claude Code, Codex. How do you see, or like, how do you think about that risk of building on top of them when they're maybe not competing today, but maybe soon will be competing directly with you?
Yeah, that's a very important thing. I think that's the biggest strategy question for anyone like us in the market. There are two different ways of thinking about it. One way to say it's not an immediate threat, because any of those CLI products, you would have to be fairly technical to understand how to use. You would have to have
it's a different audience.
It's a different audience. That's one. Now, but it's a trap to think that they're not going to move into our space. I think they will. It's obvious, So, they're going to be like, oh, that's a nice ARR you have there. Would be bad if something would happen to it. Which is what they looked at Cursor and be like, oh, that's nice. Maybe we should take it. And so the other answer there is, what's really interesting is they have this fundamental disadvantage, which is they're tied to their own code models. Are you watching the migration from Cloud Code to Codex right now?
Yes, I am.
If you've noticed it, I've noticed, and that's what I've been sort of telling investors and others. I was like, these tools, the migration path is like near zero cost. It's just calling a different CLI.
And there's no loyalty either. It's whatever the best, cheapest, fastest, that is what I will be using in the moment.
That's right. And for us, we'd be like, we're going to go to the best, cheapest models possible. Right now, Replit uses every model on the market essentially to run our agents. The backbone is still Sonnet. We think it's still the best sort of agentic tool calling model. But we're starting to use GPT-5 in all sorts of places, especially GPT-5 thinking in terms of like reviewing code and thinking really hard about problems that's important. We're big fans of Gemini Flash and Flashlight as like long context, cheap, fast models. We use it for code search and all sorts of things. So that ability is actually quite an advantage for app layer companies.
Yeah. Okay. Let's go on to the future of software engineering. You said something spicy, and I want to bring it up. I no longer think you should learn to code, right? This was a little while ago that you said, a little while ago in AI land. Do you still believe that? And if so, maybe just speak to why that is such a strong belief. Is it this transition to vibe coding?
Yeah. So the context, I'm typically talking to our audience, right? I mean the thing you start to realize as your profile grows is that there's like a lot of low context people that are going to be reading and watching your stuff. So I'm starting to kind of really try to adapt to that. But I'm talking to our audience. So who's our audience? People who want to get shit done. They're not
Yeah.
trying to be specialists. They're trying to actually build things. And if you're trying to build something, just don't worry about learning to code first. Go build it first. If you have to learn to code, you'll learn it along the way. And we hear so many stories of Replit users learning to code just by being in it.
Yeah. And so just to clarify, so I have two young kids. A few years ago, I would have said to them, the most important skill you can learn, and the most important skill I learned was learning to code because I can build things. Would you tell high school students going into college to study computer science? Would you tell the person who's interested in building things to learn to code today, or is that, like, give me some nuance there?
If they have a gift for computers and they want to become a specialist, they should learn to code and they should go to computer science school. If they have a gift for building things, if they have a gift for being uh, able to generate a lot of ideas, if they have a gift for being in having quality of being entrepreneurial, if they have a gift for business, then no, I wouldn't spend their time learning to code when their time could be better spent learning to build and learning to
Yeah.
market and learning to sell. And I think those are the qualities of the future. By the way, just to give you some historical nuance, the other day I just like went through the just like history. I'm a huge like computer history nerd. Like I think that stuff is important, underappreciated. Like Alan Kay says, like computer science is pop culture because we don't really pay attention to history. And you know the inventor of the compiler, Grace Hopper, and she invented, you know, before compilers, before the A B C compiler, uh, you know, people used to code in machine code. They didn't even call it coding. They used to just like, you know, rewire the machine essentially to run a certain different type of software. And the way she described high level programming as English, she said, I want people to program in English.
Yeah.
And the specialists will continue to exist, but I want to introduce programming to millions of people. She's talking like a vibe coder, right? She's saying that the next hot new programming language is English. And for
Yeah.
her, C programming looked like English relative to machine code. And it is this constant move towards higher levels of abstraction and getting the computer to speak more human language is an old trend, is nothing new. And I think every point of time you're going to see pushback because the specialists fear for their jobs. And they're like, I learned, I put so much time and money, and it's a you know understandable human response that hey, you're just gonna tell people to like come take my job without like the hazing that I went through, and and so that's why you get a lot of strong emotions there.
Yeah. And so, like, let's continue down the future of what the software stack might look like. I made a video a while ago commenting on something Satya Nadella, Microsoft CEO, said, essentially that the application layer is going to collapse down into agents. And you said something similar. You said agents all the way down. And so let's talk a little bit about that. What does the future architecture of the web look like when agents are all the way down? What does that look like in your mind?
When I see, especially enterprises using Replit, what they're trying to do is not build software; they're trying to solve problems. Especially in the internal tools space, you know, there's two primary use cases for Replit. One is like building products and prototyping and all of that, and the other is actually solving problems. So what we call internal tools is ultimately I'm going to build this piece of software, and then I'm going to use it, or someone else at the organization is going to use it to solve a problem. For example, I have this workflow of getting a sales request, generating a purchase order that someone on the team was doing all the time manually. All right, let me make an application that does that. And now instead of them doing it manually, they're going to just like go input the things and click generate. Well, you can go a step further. I was like, you don't even need that person to use the app. that agent will monitor the inbox for the sales kind of requests, and it will run the software itself. So use the software, and then respond with a purchase order or whatever. I'm just making up a use case here. And you go down the line, and actually, I can't find that many use cases of people building apps that couldn't be satisfied with agents. And that might sound weird because we're selling people the idea of making apps, right? But I do think this is a disruptive force that's going to disrupt us at some point. And I think we want to get ahead of it. And so uh, so we started exploring this internally. We're actually working with some governments and big enterprises. And we found that if we build like a very basic agent framework for them, where a Replit agent can create more domain specific agents, sales agents, HR agents, what have you, they'll be able to automate a lot of work.
What happens to SaaS companies in this agentic future where, let's say, Replit is providing the agent or OpenAI is providing the agent, agentic frameworks are providing the agents? What happens to these, especially verticalized SaaS companies?
I think the more point solution, the more vertical they are, the more in trouble they are. I think that the SaaS companies that are more cross-cutting, more uh, sort of, uh, they're more like the trusted record. For example, Salesforce is the CRM. It's not going to go away. It has a huge developer community around it. Uh,
Yeah.
they can build agents as well. But you're going to see a new industry emerge, and that industry is maybe vertical agents. There are early attempts at it, with 11x SDR agent, with a few other things. I don't think they're working very well, but we're going to get to a point where uh, a company will emerge around this idea of like, we're just going to build the best accountant agent possible. Replit's not going to be able to do it, or OpenAI is not going to be able to do it, because we're just going to hire the best. The founder themselves might be an accountant, and they're going to integrate into all the accounting systems. And then we're going to sell you an agent. We're not going to sell you SaaS. And the business model for that is going to be interesting and I think more novel. You can't charge per seat on it because you're actually displacing seats.
Yeah.
Usage-based charging is interesting. And for a while, I thought that usage-based model might be the way to go. But I think it undersells the value of this thing. I think we're going to go back to early enterprise software with value-based model.
Task completion kind of
Perhaps,
objectives.
but you look at Palantir. I think Palantir perhaps has a business model that's more future facing than otherwise we thought. It felt like Palantir is more of like a solutions company. In
Yeah.
reality, I think agents will be more like that. Could be task completion,
Interesting.
could be negotiated based on value created. I'm not entirely sure, but I'm very sure it'll be value based.
Okay, and then if you continue into the future looking at software, there's this potential for software to transition to fully end-to-end neural networks, including the operating system. I know Elon Musk has talked about that. Do you believe that's possible? I asked Satya Nadella directly about this. He thought there was always going to be a place for the traditional operating system. But what happens, or first of all, do you think that there's a potential to have end-to-end neural networks for all software? And then what does that world look like?
No, and the reason I think no is because we already see it that neurosymbolic systems are better than purely neural-based systems. I think Elon is inspired by the Tesla V13 rewrite, where they got rid of
Yeah,
a lot of these
the bitter
rules,
lesson.
the bitter lesson. Uh,
Yeah.
but I think what we increasingly find is not that you need human programmers, but that we need more deterministic environments for these neural networks to be able to write programs in. So that's like a really important thing, program synthesis, because programs are really useful tools, and LLMs will find them useful as well. Because the idea of like us solving all of computations in LLMs that are fundamentally stochastic, I think is not realistic, nor is I think it is desirable, just because we need determinism, we need correctness, we need completeness, we need provability. And for all these reasons, I think that classical computers will continue to exist. That is not to say the programs will be written by humans, but I think certainly LLMs will continue to do program synthesis.
Interesting. Interesting. Okay. Okay, I guess we'll have to check in 15 years or so, and we'll see what happens. I want to talk a little bit about the future of white collar work. I actually, going into this interview with you, I thought I knew where you were gonna come on the spectrum of, let's say Anthropic CEO saying it's a white collar bloodbath, and then on the other side it's utopia and everybody's hyper productive. So let me just ask you directly, where do you fall on this spectrum of where white collar work is going to end up in the next 5 years?
Yeah, I think there's going to be tremendous disruption for sure. I think people will lose their jobs. I think not saying that is being dishonest. I think any CEO working in the space will be able to intuit that. Uh, that being said, I don't think it's the end of jobs. I don't think it's the end of work. I think those who adapt, I think those who learn how to use these tools will have so tremendous value.
Do you think there are going to be less jobs? Let's look at Replit. Let's say all of a sudden each of your engineers is 10x more productive. Are you thinking, okay, then I'm not going to hire anymore. I'm going to let people go, or hey, everybody's so productive, I'm actually going to double down and invest more and hire more people. So how would you approach that situation in which hyper productivity comes to Replit?
You need to think about it through the lens of the communication tax. So, will AI solve the communication tax? So the problem is the uh, uh, adding people. If it was purely um, accretive to productivity without taking away from anything else, then obviously you just like would hire people, especially as the more productive they are. You just keep adding them. The problem, and that's the problem with bigger companies, is the more people, the more communication issues they are, the more meetings they are, the more. I mean, at some point, a lot of companies end up, hiring people and taking away from productivity. Will AI solve that? And I think that's a big question. Like, will AI solve the communication bottleneck? And if it did, then yeah, companies will expand until like they're able to cover every piece of the part of the market they're able to kind of win. But if not, then there are going to be always kind of limits to how many people you want to add, and then you want to actually constrain your growth, and uh, you want to be able to just keep the most productive people possible, because in that scenario, letting people go is probably more accretive to productivity, because then you can just focus your best people on doing their best work. So I think it's uncertain. I don't think it's quite known yet whether what the answer to this question is.
Yeah, it's interesting. I spoke to Aaron Levy, Box CEO, and he, put it plainly. If I have one team that's using AI and they become incredibly productive, and the ROI on the dollar spent on that team come back 10, 100 fold, why wouldn't I either double down the investment on that team or build out similar small parallel teams just like that?
Yeah, I mean, again, you run into limits of organizations. That team will have a headcount limit where things will start getting chaotic, and then let's say you add more teams like that. There's going to be an organizational limit on how collaborative these teams are. So that these are these communication limits that I don't think people are really thinking about it. And I think it sounds good that, like, okay, if I can supercharge my employees with AI, then I can add endless amounts of employees and still get the same benefit. Uh, I remember when we first started scaling Replit employees headcount. So I had this measure where it's like the best way I can get an idea for our productivity is number of pull requests uh, per capita, right? So how many close per request does an engineer do in average? And as we're adding people, there was a point where the growth in per requests were super linear, so it was like actually accelerating. Um, and then at some point, it became sublinear. So we need to add ever more people to get an additional person of productivity that we added, a few months before. And when I looked at it, it was clear that we have these communication bottlenecks and these organizational bottlenecks. And oftentimes you do reorgs and you change the culture or how you work, and things will get better. Uh, but a lot of times it is just like almost like a natural law of how humans are able to work. We have these Dunbar numbers and a lot of things that anthropologists have observed over time, and so I think it's worth thinking about these things.
It's interesting. Maybe that's where there are markets to be created with AI solving some of these communication tax issues. I hadn't thought of that. That's a really interesting point.
There's this interesting economist. I think his name is Tom Coase, and he came with this idea of like the theory of the firm. And the idea behind the theory of the firm is like, what is a full-time employee really? Like if a firm can go out to the market and get that service done in the market, why would you need to hire someone? In essence, a full-time employee is a bug, not a feature of capitalism. In a truly efficient market where the transaction cost, which is the bottleneck, is really low, you would go out to the market to get anything done, right? And anytime you're hiring someone, the market has failed you. I mean, obviously there's a lot of nuance, but it is a very compelling idea. And so I think thinking through that lens, maybe that doesn't mean that companies are expanding very quickly because you can add hyper productive AI people, but it might mean that there's a lot more freelancers, a lot more entrepreneurs on the market, either offering their services or offering their agents that they imbued with very specific domain knowledge, that they're able to hire and rent out, and maybe the sort of the company, the person of the company contracting out to that agent is not even a person, it's another agent. So perhaps that is the economy of agents as well.
Okay, so let's continue on that for a second. I'm sure you've seen the memes about the permanent underclass, right? Lock in for the last X number of months before you get consigned to the permanent underclass. Do you believe that's going to be a thing when AGI comes? I mean, it's as you're describing this this kind of economic landscape, it sounds like it was heading in that direction. But I would maybe give you a chance to comment on that.
There's two things. There's inequality, which is a problem, and there's also another important thing is economic dynamism. The interesting thing is, people will say that America has more inequality than Europe. I think Nassim Taleb kind of shared these numbers like a while back and shared thoughts about this. Is if you look at America, there's a lot more economic dynamism. So the top 10% actually circulate very, very quickly. So people get rich and then they're not rich anymore, or they die off, and the next generation are not as rich for various reasons, and then new kind of rich kind of emerge, and you see that happening very quickly, and that is a sign of a market that's truly meritocratic. And I think from an ethical perspective, I think that's more important than distribution of resources, because I think that gets into all sorts of problem that we've seen with communism and socialism and all that stuff. So I think that's the metric that I would look at. Does it make it so that the rich will continue to ever more be richer? It is impossible for you to get rich. Is that the case? I don't think it's the case right now. I think since AI arrived on the scene, we have more equal opportunity than ever for people to be able to improve their economic situation thanks to AI. So far, that's not the case, but AGI might change that.
Yeah, I think the context is once AGI happens, once AI is better than all humans at any cognitive task, then capital is the only thing that matters, because it's effectively your ability to leverage that AGI. And so if you don't have capital, you can't leverage AGI, and thus stuck in the permanent underclass.
I would question the premise, perhaps. Like that might be a detour, but like what are the limits of AI and AGI? Is there anything special about humans? And I believe there's something special about humans. I think the way we do AI today is that AI is good at things that's already been done. It's not very good at things that's never been done. I think human ingenuity is better at things that's never been done, like truly generating new ideas. Will that continue to be the case? I think it's a philosophical question. I think it gets into the question of consciousness, perhaps religious beliefs as well. And I think Silicon Valley takes it for granted that that human consciousness is replicable or human level intelligence is replicable in the machine. I don't. I think it requires some intellectual humility to know our limits of understanding of reality and the world. And I think we're sort of early in our understanding of reality. I think it is hubris to think that we've sort of we know everything and we're able to build these we're able to build the most magnificent thing possible in machines. And by the way, if you talk to some of the AI researchers, like more traditional AI researchers, they don't think that LLMs is even intelligence. Um,
Yeah.
I might disagree with that a little bit, but there's some truth to the idea that LLMs are like really fancy compression machines that we're putting to use in all sorts of interesting ways, but they lack the very important, crucial property of being able to efficiently learn on the fly. I think it's like an hour long discussion that we can have, which I'm willing to have. But I just like I wouldn't take the premise just as a done deal.
I like the question that you pose, which is there something fundamentally special about humans? And if the answer is yes, then you're right. The premise of AGI equals permanent underclass pretty much goes away. So yeah, I can appreciate that sentiment. I want to maybe you can just speak briefly. This is I wonder what it was like during your, let's say, 10-year overnight success, right? All of a sudden you release this agent product and you go from what took 10 years to reach, I believe the number was 10 million ARR. And then in like the next 6 months, correct me if these numbers are wrong, you hit 100 million. What was it like internally? What was the feeling?
I think that companies before commercial success rely on collective delusion in a way, and I think you want to embrace that because, like, just the act of creating a startup is sort of an irrational belief in oneself or in the team, and what bounded us together is this mission that anyone can program, that anyone can create software, and everyone that came to work at Replit really believed in that, and and actually the first time I felt like that dream, that bubble was kind of popped is when we did a layoff in 2024, because in 2024 we we've we were burning a lot of money. um we've tried a lot of things to commercialize the platform, but we weren't growing revenue fast enough. I knew that agents was the thing to get to for the company to kind of take off. We needed to again lower the barrier to entry even more so we get access to more people that want to make software. And then after we did that, it was a very dark time, like in summer 2024, because everyone suddenly was faced with actual reality that, hey, like, that the dream is there, but it's not happening. How long is it going to take to happen? Is it another 10 years? Like, I don't have another 10 years in me. Like, we've been working really hard, and a lot of people started leaving. So we did a layoff, and then like even more people left. And so we're like 130 people, then we got down to 60 people. Now, the interesting thing about it is that there's a group of people we called the Agent Task Force at the time that were tasked with, like, we gotta succeed in building an agent because that's the thing that's going to save the company. And when we launched it in September and the revenue immediately grew, there was still disbelief. Actually, people continued to leave at the time because it's like not working,
Wow.
which is weird. And I kept telling them, look, I don't think we appreciate what we've built here. I don't think we appreciate where the world is headed. Like, and then again, that yeah, it was a very interesting uh, filter because the true believers were left at the company, and those believers not only thought that we're on the right track, and, everyone still thinks that we're not even we just got started. Like it's going to be so much more magnificent what we're going to be able to build, and the kind of value that we're going to be able to deliver to the world. And so there was like there was another dream that was brewing and that was growing. Now that I think that the quality that I've been trying to build in myself and by extension of the company is actually feeling is not focusing on what's on the problems or what's going wrong and actually celebrating because I'll tell you that it like I've become so stoic that the bad things or the good things do not affect me anymore, and I'm so focused on the future and what's possible and how far we can take this that whatever happens I just don't care. I'll just like keep the kind of the driving forces. I'll just keep going because the prize is still really in the future. But recently I've been reflecting and I was like, we need to celebrate and we need to talk about what we've been able to build. And so the feeling as of the past couple of months in the company have been the morale is super high. Everyone's super excited. Everyone's working really hard, but it feels effortless because it really feels like we're achieving something and doing something good for the world.
Yeah, that's amazing. Thanks for sharing that story. I'm so appreciative of what you're building because, first of all, I love builders. You're a builder, but you're building something that allows builders to go build. So I'm like doubly appreciative. And thank you so much for your time today, Amjad. This has been a pleasure.
Of course, Matthew, it's been my pleasure, and it's been amazing to also watch your rise. Like, I don't know where you came from, but all of a sudden I'm seeing interviewing all these CEOs, and your show has been really great. Yeah, really appreciate it. It's one of the best shows that's come out recently.
I thank you. That means a lot. Thanks, Amjad. And we'll talk again soon, hopefully.
My pleasure. Yeah.
All right.